A year ago this week, I was back in the Orkney Islands. I say back as if going to the Orkney Islands was a regular occurrence, but the truth was, the last time I had been here was as a small child on a family holiday over 40 years ago. But although all these decades had passed, it felt strangely familiar. It could have been because I'd read and reread novels, short stories, and poems by a writer called George Mackay Brown, who's one of my favourites, and he spent his life here. And these had kept the Orkney landscape and its history and its characters present in my imagination. Or maybe it was because my archaeologist parents thought that Orkney was the centre of the Neolithic universe. I'd heard their theories about Skara Brae and stone circles and brochs all my life. I listened to fiddle tunes played by Orcadian fiddlers and music by Peter Maxwell Davis, a composer who'd made his home here. If you haven't heard his piece, Orkney Wedding with Sunrise, for orchestra and, spoiler alert, bagpipes, you're missing out. I think one of the reasons it had taken me so long to get back here was that it just took so long to get here. We crossed the Irish Sea, we'd driven the length of Scotland from Stranraer to Thurso, and then taken the ferry from Scrabster to Stromness, with 2 dogs and my mother for company. At least we felt like we were really getting away from it all. Wherever we are in the world, our 2 collies wake with the sun and expect an early morning walk. This is problematic in Orkney in midsummer because the sun hardly sets. By about the 3rd day of the holiday, we were getting used to getting up early, before 6 or 7 each morning, and Campbell and I went out at that time of day to explore. We eventually found an ideal spot for a dog walk. We drove out of Stromness to a car park beside a graveyard where we could join a path which hugged the shore, looking over the sound to the island of Hoy. I'd read that George Mackay Brown's grave was in this graveyard, so one morning I had a wander through the stones to try and find it. This wasn't easy. There were stones going back at least a couple of centuries and signs of recent burials. I wandered up and down the lines, not knowing what I was looking for. I didn't find George's grave that day, but another headstone caught my eye. It stood out because it was new and different. Instead of polished granite, this was a slab of grey rock, carved with an image of a boat on the waves, with words of poetry dancing in and around the ship. All I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and a quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trick's over. You might know it. There was a name, Ian Morrison, and dates 1950 to 2019, and no more details. And I stood for a time beside this stone and thought about who this man might have been. Someone at home on the sea, someone loved by people who had created a unique and beautiful reminder of this man's unique and beautiful life. 2 weeks later, and we'd been back home a few days, and I had the radio on to accompany some mundane tasks. It was Radio 4 and soul music was on. If you haven't heard soul music, seek it out, although it's a rival podcast. Each episode features personal stories from people who love a particular piece of music. And coincidentally, this episode was about a piece by Peter Maxwell Davis called Farewell to Stromness, a piano piece written in Orkney in 1980 as a protest against a proposed uranium mine on the islands. So my ears pricked up. It's a simple, dignified piece of music, which was written as part of this satirical review, but it's since been played at a royal wedding and regularly at island funerals. And someone on the programme spoke about hearing the music in the moments after the birth of her baby, and for her it was perfect music to welcome a new child into the world. One of the voices speaking about the music had that lovely Orcadian accent that we'd just heard days before. The speaker's name was Tim. He spoke about growing up on the islands, meeting Peter Maxwell Davis, or Max as he's known, how they had loved each other, how they had parted, and how near the end of Max's life they had become companions again when Tim had cared for Max in his illness. As Tim spoke, I was struck by a familiarity about his voice that was more than a vague holiday reminiscence. It was one of those moments that stops you in your tracks. And in a flashback, I was taken back to my university days in Aberdeen, also a good few decades ago, when Tim from Orkney had been a friend of mine. And the last time I'd seen him was at our graduation ball when we'd shared a table. We hadn't kept in touch, and I'd lost track of him many years ago. I had no idea what path his life had taken, but I was sure it was the same Tim. So I did what anyone might do in that situation. I looked him up on Facebook, and there he was, still living in Orkney, in Max's old house. And on his page, there were messages of congratulations for his recent marriage, and I was glad to see that he'd found love again. But there were also messages of condolence. His brother had recently died, his brother Ian Morrison. I sent Tim a message and he remembered me. I told him about being on Orkney and finding the gravestone by chance and wondering if it might have been his brother's. It was. Ian Morrison was a sailor. The stone was carved by a sculptor who knew him well. Tim and I exchanged a few messages and wished each other well. We remembered our time in university, but we didn't dwell on it. He told me how he has found happiness since Max's death, how the benefits of island life outweigh the challenges, and how strange life is to weave random threads together until a connection is made in this small world.
Oh, Helen, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. How lovely. I like the way you kind of skirt over the long journey to get there and you just narrowed it all down to that one gorgeous moment in front of that grave. Did you ever take any photographs of that beautiful grave?
I did, actually. I have it.
Send it on to us. We'll put it out on the feed if you like.
Yeah,
and we can send out the link to soul music as well. Your two musical, I wrote down your two musical recommendations, Orkney Wedding at Sunrise and soul music. No surprise to anybody that you're a music teacher. Those little tidbits of information that you're dropping there. That's such a beautiful, beautiful story of small world. Thank you so much. Gorgeous.